Travis Thompson, welcome back. It is good to have you in the studio here.
Thank you for having me this morning.
All right, so I have been looking forward to this conversation, and I'm hoping you can give me a little insight here. On Friday nights, our family often is involved in serving the homeless ministry, and one of the people that we encounter all the time, regular visitor, is someone who is about a 6'2" dude. Who has more hair on his face than I do and hair on his legs than I do. And I mean, big guy.
Mm-hmm.
He's got to be, 270 and has nice long blonde hair and sometimes makeup, fully dressed as a woman, identifies with a name, a female name. And I bring my 12-year-old and my 9-year-old kid to this. And that has led to all sorts of questions.
I bet. Sure.
All sorts of conversations with them as to what is going on. And now that they know this individual a little bit, they're starting to see other people and wondering, hey, how big of an issue is this? For those who are identifying, those who want to transition, those who consider themselves transgender, gender-affirming care in the field that you work in, like how big of an issue is this in culture today?
The psychology world has honestly been taken over by storm from this level of thinking, from where it was a niche issue, gender dysphoria. It was one of those things that you'd read about and go, wow, that's interesting. I'll just store it away somewhere, into a huge thing that every therapist, psychologist, social worker has to contend with. So this is absolutely overtaken that, and we've actually seen in culture it spiked around 2022, and interestingly enough, it's actually started to fall some as well. So it's a very interesting look into this whole realm of psychology.
One thing I've realized through all of the changes in how people want to live, what they decide about how they were born, is that the terms seem to change.
Sure.
Like I hear transgender, I have an idea of what that means. Clinically, what does transgenderism mean?
Sure. So let me give what is commonly assumed and then what I use just for clarity's sake. When somebody says they are a trans man, that means that they identify as a man, biologically a woman. Same thing the other way around. Where that gets confusing is sometimes people assume, well, is trans man someone who's a biological man who identifies as a woman? And so that gets a little confusing. So the way that I explain all this is I say a trans-identifying man and a trans-identifying woman. Because I think it gives a little more clarity to the situation. Some of the other things to define, gender-affirming care is a wide array of things, everything from puberty blockers to surgery, social transitioning, that sort of thing, right? So these terms, if you don't know what they mean, you're going to get caught up in nuance and just completely lost.
Sure. You said this spiked just a few years ago in 2022. But for us to hit a spike, we had to start somewhere. Like, how did we get to the point where this became like the rage? This was even popular at one point.
So there's a few different ideas. I think it's underneath a huge umbrella in psychology. I think one of the biggest contributing factors is the shift in thinkers in the field of psychology. Initially, it was a very male-dominated field, and patients were subjects we could tinker with. In the 50s, because men tend to be more interested in things than people, all of a sudden we had these patients and we were like cutting out parts of their brains and shocking them, that sort of thing to try to figure it out, right? So women came along, and I think our sweet spot was around the 70s. You had people like Bowlby and Ainsworth, where you had what's considered a stereotypical female perspective, where you see people as people, we engage and care for them, right? And so I think that was the big balance, where we were able to look objectively and also engage, care, be empathetic. The problem is now we've shifted the pendulum the complete opposite way, where it's entirely dominated by women, which I wasn't entirely thrilled that it was dominated by men, because we were just messing with people, basically. But there's a lack of now objective engagement, where it's now just about care, support, social acceptance, that sort of thing. So that's one of the big overarching factors. Another one is, I think, especially the internet. particularly social media. One website in particular that I think started this whole thing that your listeners might not really be aware of is a website called Tumblr. Okay. Tumblr back in the day was this message board that was somewhat anonymous. You post about anything. A lot of it was porn. But some of the things that really stood out at that time was there was religious ideology for anorexia and bulimia. There were fan pages of school shooters.
Oh, wow.
And more importantly, and relevant today, there was the beginnings a lot of the transgender movement, where people all of a sudden started trending that way. And because it was a culture of hyper acceptance, building, and building, well, Tumblr falls, other things pick up like YouTube, Instagram, that sort of thing. It becomes more popularized. There's been a big argument of whether this is a social contagion or not. I mean, I think the data shows it. Whether people like it or not, the data shows it. And so my overall thought or theory is this is a moving target that's actually fixed. That there's...
What do you mean by that?
So there's inner issues, which most people call the human condition, right? That happen particularly in youth. When we have to figure out who we are, what that means. Men and women struggle with this differently. Women particularly with feeling comfortable in their bodies, which I think is really relevant here, right? Early on, this sounds weird to say, back in my day.
About 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. A lot of the way to deal with the human condition, especially in teenage years, was self-harm.
Yeah.
Was much more popular. You have anorexia, bulimia, all these other identifying things, right? But as culture shifts, so do those coping skills for the human condition. And so we found ourselves here, but it's amplified by social media because you can curate photos, right? This man really looks like a woman because of the filters, the angle, the makeup, but you see them out in public and it's a different story. So it's created these sort of caricatures that people seem to think are real. So there's so much behind this. I'm trying to condense it as much as I possibly can.
Oh, sure. Is that just still a need for acceptance? Still trying to find their place in this world? I mean, I'm trying to grapple with why someone who, as a little girl, did all the little girl things and then all of a sudden at 12 decided, I want to be a guy.
So this is, again, where I think psychology has really missed the mark because we've made it a monolith of explanation. If you feel that way, it's because it's true. In reality, we know boys and girls are different. When we talk about girls specifically, one of the things that has emerged is autism. So we look at girls with autism and we go, well, they don't really have it. They do. It presents differently in boys and girls. And some of the hallmarks are lack of social engagement. Not as good at it, right? Also, discomfort in your body is common with autism as well. So for girls, there seem to be slightly different motivations for boys. A lot of boys, it can be rejection of self, which is interesting for girls. And I think one of the most important things to point out in terms of motivation is something that a lot of Christians aren't thrilled about, but a lot of gay advocates, I'm wondering where they are in all of this. A lot of the transgender movement is people rejecting their feelings of being gay. So they reject this idea and instead go to, I can become this other gender and align with the people I'm attracted to. And we know this because if you do nothing for the vast majority of people who identify as transgender in their youth, end up identifying as gay. So it's this interesting convolution where, somebody like me who goes, hey, we need to figure out if this is like trauma, is this autism, is this sexual perversion, is this, abuse, what is it? But then we go, what if they're gay and rejecting it? That sounds like conversion therapy as defined by other people, right? So it's, once you start peeling back the layers, it's hardly defensible, but you have to get over that hump first.
Sure.
Yeah. And so whether, it's you with someone coming into your office who says this is an issue that I need to talk about, or just best practices as you would see that, for someone who is entertaining these ideas, thinking that maybe I am, a female trapped in a man's body or the other way around, how do you begin to kind of peel back some of those layers and get to what actually is going on?
Part of that is almost impossible, and I say that tongue in cheek because it's really not. But the air around this topic in the psychology world is if you stray slightly, you're wrong and evil.
Meaning, if you tell somebody, no, you really are a guy, you were born a guy, you're wrong.
No, even in the sense of, hey, I wonder where this comes from.
Oh.
Right, like
Just to
that might
challenge
be
that it's
Don't
not
even,
intrinsic.
yeah.
right.
You
So
kinda-
that might be something that comes way down the line. Just like with any other mental health issue, you don't immediately go, hey, this is because of trauma. They'll say, well, screw you. That's not what this is.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You're not even really allowed to go, are you sure? Like, let's think this through for a second. Right? You can't really do that. That's not accepted.
Okay.
A lot of the regulatory bodies and I would say even a lot of the therapists in the area will say that's wrong, evil, and conversion therapy to even question. So that's the first obstacle, is just to say, what happens if I present this? Because a lot of therapists, including myself, will say the moment we step out of line, there's a whole group of people that will engage with backlash.
Sure.
So there's this ideological capture that the first step is even being able to say, are you sure?
So that's I'm got so many thoughts running through my head.
Right.
How did we get to a point where a therapist can't say, let's unpack this? Are you sure? Can we go here? I mean, I'm assuming it's because so much pressure came from one worldview or ideology
Sure.
that says this is the way it has to be. If we want to be able to say, are you sure? Let's unpack this. Is the best way to, in a sense, say, I don't care what best practices say. We need to get back to what truly are best practices, what really is the best for the client and the patient. How do you begin to change that?
So big overarching issues for this. One is the hypermedicalization of the psyche. So we see this in a whole bunch of other places, particularly in addiction care as well, where you have this severe issue. It must be a disease that must be treated. Medicine's the answer, right? For transgender identification, it's not disease, it's identity. It's religious and spiritual, if we're being honest, right?
Yeah.
I would say the over-feminization, I think a balance is where it flourishes. I think psychology thrives in that balance, as well as, and I know this is a hot button topic for a lot of people, I think a lot of social Marxist ideology, because it comes from this idea that external pressures dictate the internal person. So people aren't identifying as transgender because external forces are telling them they can't, which is non-falsifiable. And so you get this sort of defenseless but also unquestioned ideology when you marry all of those things together.
To me, that leaves an individual fairly hopeless. They are already struggling, and the challenge that's going on in their brains and interacting in society, and they go to their therapist, and the therapist can't help them get to the bottom of things because I wonder, is there research yet on somebody goes all the way through a transgender adaptation, I guess, from being female and changing to a male, and they're still miserable, and they can't figure it out, but nobody can help them?
This is, again, where there's huge issues, because if you go with the what I call Gnostic dualism, I have a secret knowledge that my mind and my body are completely separate. If you go with that, then somebody who identifies as transgender is, no question. But what happens for detransitioners?
Right.
Right. So were they ever trans? Well, you would have to say no. So were they pretending? Because the rules were, if you say that you are, then you are. And this is where I get to it's unchallenging and indefensible at the same time, right? So for those people who do feel that inner turmoil, for them, it's basically hold on for the ride. Because something interesting happens, and especially in research, if you break this down, a lot of the research that we have says, look, this care works. Dig through the data. in order to get the hormones, surgeries, and all that, they have to be a part of pro-trans support groups. They have to go to gender-affirming care clinics where you have this entire community of people that wraps around them.
Hmm.
And so I believe that's where most of the benefit comes from. But also, what do you do when you've gone in that deep?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You're in that deep. You've irreversibly changed your body. And you have this whole group of people around you that you'd have to reject.
Mm.
Most people sit through it. There's some absolutely wonderful people I follow on X. Laura Becker, Chloe Cho. They're detransitioners who have advocated in the U.S. for better care, opening up the way for lawsuits, especially. So for most people, it's you have to accept the void if you want to reject this thing that you've been on for so long.
Wow. So
Deep.
we have been on this journey that you said kind of hit a peak at 2022.
Mm-hmm.
And that was its peak.
Mm-hmm.
That tells me that we're, starting to see a dip coming down the other side a little bit. What is that? What does that look like? What's behind that?
Competing theories exist for why that happens. If you go with the social Marxist theory, it's because there's been public backlash and now trans people can't get accepted. I think that's a weak position because it's entirely externally focused. There's no individual. They only exist as part of the system, which I don't know. I just can't square that. I think part of what it is we've started to look at the long-term data and we started to see long-term outcomes. Now, it has been some in research, but mostly you now have detransitioners speaking out.
Right.
And going, hey, it didn't work.
Mm.
And now I've messed up my body for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I even saw a post the other day of a detransitioner. I think her name's Prisha Mosley, and she posted blood work she has to do every month because she took a massive amount of testosterone and basically ruined her endocrine system.
Mm-hmm.
Her body cannot produce hormones in any normal way ever again. And so people are looking at that going, wait. I think also there is a small subsection of people who jumped on the bandwagon for acceptance. I don't think that's the largest part of it for sure. I think a lot of it is people are saying, wait a minute, I was told this was the miracle cure, and there are more and more people saying it didn't work for me.
Mm.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
It does, but I still keep thinking of the individual who is hurting and trying to find a place where they belong. And then how does this impact the church? What is the church supposed to be doing to help, to love, to care? Because we all have a sin nature and we don't like to think or talk about that, but this is still part of that conversation.
I think this speaks to one of what I believe the greatest sins of the psychology field today is a hyper-focus on the individual. We don't necessarily consider second and third order implications.
Meaning?
So if somebody identifies as trans, right, and we just fully accept them, what we don't tend to consider is what are the psychology of the people who live and interact with that person. We go carte blanche, well, they just have to accept it. It's a lot of change and tension for someone. And we've seen this, like the big changing rooms, things that have happened, right?
Yeah.
So psychology is just sort of just dipped out on second and third order effects. For the church, this is where a lot of churches have decided to not ride the line at all, where they say either we don't talk about it or God made you this way. And people will say, well, I was born trans. I have a hard time with that because, Nicodemus was told directly, go be born again.
Yeah.
That's something my pastor says, I'm sorry, you were born angry, go be born again.
Yeah.
Right. Now, that doesn't mean that all this stuff's going to go away, but as the church, if we ignore those second and third order effects, like what happens for the congregants in the church? We don't consider the body, we consider the individual.
Sure.
Right. So there's a line that these pastors have to walk of how much do we let people come as they are, which I think the church should, and how much do we start co-signing on things because we're scared? So for me, I don't have the temperament to be a pastor. I'm just going to level with you. I just don't. So I can't speak to exactly how it can be handled, but what I can say is that thought process doesn't work out because some of it is really, really dark and people don't like to think about it. But you also have to consider everybody else too. What do the other people think and feel is this happening? If we know that it's not really true, quote unquote, what does it say to the rest of the congregation that we're acting as if it is?
Yeah.
That's quite the message
It is.
that does potentially send to the congregation. And, that many may not pick up on that, but many will. And man, now there's all sorts of crazy tension in that. And so as we see the science and psychology and the medical studies starting to show that whatever people were chasing and thought that they were going to get out of transitioning is coming up more empty than they thought. It didn't fix the problem and the void. Obviously, the simple big answer is Jesus, but how can the church, how can Christians, you think, begin to enter into conversation well with someone who they may have in their family, someone that they may work with, somebody in their neighborhood that they're friends with? How can we have, you think, healthy conversations pointing people potentially to Jesus when, man, identity is a thing that so many people say, I can't let go of that identity?
There's going to be a point of discernment for a lot of pastors here, because this is a broad generalization, but there's people who, quote unquote, truly identify as trans, and then there's the people who exploit it for sexual gratification. We call autogynephilia. There are some rather grotesque explanations that I think are right on the nose. And if people really want to look into it and look into the void, there's a scene from this TV show. It's awful, but there's a scene from The White Lotus that explains it, and somebody just speaks plainly. I think a lot of pastors need to watch that, because there are plenty of grown men who claim this identity as a sexual fetish and nothing else. So for pastors, they have to discern who are the people that are struggling and say, okay, you're hurting, what do we do? And who are the people that are just malicious in it? And is there hurt underneath? Sure. But the overall intention of that is entirely different. And a lot of pastors have just bowed out of even trying to consider it.
Well, like you said, it's dark, it's hard, it's difficult. You don't have all the answers. We haven't been prepared for this in a lot of ways spiritually, because the answers, as you said, like the answer, bottom line, still is Jesus and Scripture and the power of the Holy Spirit. Yet we have taken, not that the power is not still there, but we as humans have desensitized even the power of God because of our unwillingness to repent and to walk with the Lord. And I mean, there's so much in my brain that goes, man, we could look at this in such a simple way, but it's such a complex problem now and challenge that my little brain goes, I don't even.
Well, this could be a 3-hour conversation easily. I mean, I feel like we're barely scratching the surface of it.
Totally barely scratching. Yeah. Which leads us to say that you can contact Dr. Travis Thompson with all of the things that are in the show notes. And it's not to laugh away the situation, but there is hope, and his name is Jesus. There is help, and I hope that you'll find that in the church, but also through people and practitioners like you who know the Lord and also know the science behind what's going on and can help people have a conversation. Even if you can't say, are we sure? You can still start a conversation to help another human being. And I think we're going to have to come back to this. I just think there's more to be asked and answered. But for today, we're really glad you're part of Dynasty Plus.